Hello, everybody. Welcome to our latest webinar on the capitalism and crisis as exposed by COVID-19 and the question, can the modern monetary theory offer a solution to the crisis? This is obviously, in a sense, this is a bit difficult to talk about because this is still very much an ongoing situation we're talking about here. It certainly looks, and that's what some economists are saying, one of the biggest, if not the biggest recession ever going to hit us, certainly since modern capitalism has countered those sorts of things. What is already clear that poor working class people do not just suffer disproportionately in high numbers from the virus in terms of death, etc., but they will also be the ones that will have to suffer the economic fallout from this crisis in a disproportionate way. We've seen there's now well over 2 million people unemployed, a jump of about 900,000 just in April this year. About 8 million people in Britain have been furloughed. I've never actually said the word out loud, furloughed, with the state currently covering about 80% of their wages. And no doubt many of them will be sacked before long. Millions more are suffering, who've been forced into so-called self-employment, with all the risks and none of the benefits of regular employees. So capitalism has certainly shown that it is utterly incapable to deal with either the virus itself or keeping people safe and healthy. Profit comes first and capitalism always. The relations between labor and capital in this period could well come to a head in this period. Periods of crisis have in it the possibility of something new, something different. On the other hand, you know, the kind of working class that has been defeated and is suffering so much, can it fight back? And these are questions we will discuss. Our webinars organized by the Labour Left Alliance are certainly trying to get the working class, helping to get it prepared, organized and educated. And we are putting currently 2 webinars on every week and hope comrades will join us. So we have two main speakers today. Chris Williamson, former MP for the Labour Party, the most famous victim of the witch hunt in the Labour Party, and I'm very glad to welcome him here. He will speak first. Then we have Michael Roberts. I'm equally glad to welcome him. He's a Marxist economist, and he will speak second. Then we can have questions and comments from comrades from the floor. Please, if you want to speak, press the button that says raise hand, and a little blue hand will show up, and then I can make you into panelists, and we can all see you. So without further ado, first is Chris. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks very much indeed for inviting me to speak this evening, Tina. And I think you're absolutely right in your opening remarks about the crisis of capitalism, although we've heard that before, haven't we? And I think there really is a genuine crisis of capitalism now, which is coming to a head, not just with this COVID-19 crisis, but in terms of the potential existential threat which is facing the world now from climate change. And I don't believe that capitalism has the answer to that. And indeed, capitalism is the problem and the reason why, you know, we're facing an existential crisis from the climate change and all the attendant problems associated with that, which will inevitably hurt the poorest communities around the world the hardest, and probably the first too. But tonight, obviously, we're talking on the issue of MMT and COVID-19 and the government's response to it. And for me, I think MMT, I mean, I've been a convert to MMT because I think it offers a lens to understand the monetary system, because it's very, very clear, as you've outlined it, as I've just reiterated, that the present system is absolutely broken. We've been living with this neoliberal economic prospectus really since Margaret Thatcher was elected in 1979. And it's a real sad fact that those of us associated with the Labour movement, that the Labour Party under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown bought into the whole neoliberal country, which is what it is. But it's very interesting, isn't it? Because if you remember Theresa May talking about there's no such thing as a magic money tree, and there isn't. And I'll go on to explain the way in which I believe a government with its own sovereign currency can actually use that to good effect. It's not any kind of magical trick. It's not a magic money tree. But there are huge opportunities available to governments like the British government, which is a currency issuing government. But what we've seen is this government, this Tory government, actually spending money hand over fist, albeit in a very poorly targeted way. But it illustrates the point that when a government puts its mind to it, it can invest. And what I would like to see, obviously, is the government investing in a different kind of way to the way in which they have done. But they have made money available in an unprecedented scale for particularly a Conservative administration. But it's important to remind ourselves that Britain is the 5th biggest economy anywhere in the world. But what I would say is an indication of how broken this system is. Even though we have the 5th biggest economy in the world, we've got 14 million people in Britain living in poverty. 1.5 million are actually destitute. We have an appalling housing crisis. We know that in every town and city in the land, there are people sleeping on the street, and that is only going to get worse unless we get a grip of this whole issue of the need for investment in our economy, investment in housing, investment in public services, investment to eradicate poverty. Precarious employment is now endemic throughout the land as well. People on part-time, zero-hour contracts are really prey to unscrupulous employers, and we need, therefore, in my opinion, a very different approach to the one that we've been pursuing for the best part of 40 years. And what I would argue is that successive governments have been indulging in an economic fantasy. The economy of Great Britain is not the same as a household budget. This was something that Margaret Thatcher, I think, popularised when she became the leader of the Conservative Party in the mid-1970s. I mean, look, when a household spends, when I spend, when you spend, we've got to find that income from somewhere, haven't we? Either, and if we want to buy big stuff, if you want to buy a car, I bought a car about 18 months ago. I didn't have I think it was about £12,000 to hand, and I had to borrow that money. But that doesn't apply to a government in the same way that it does to a household. And before I go on to say a little bit about the kind of day-to-day revenue expenditure of a government like the UK, so I want to just say a quick word about all this talk about borrowing. And in my opinion, the kind of government bond market is it's a kind of corporate welfare, really, and completely unnecessary, actually, either. I mean, what for example, governments could do is to engage in overt monetary financing rather than actually selling bonds into the market. And people, I mean, and the bond market has actually just gone, yields from government bonds, I think it was last week, just went negative. So, people are investing in these bonds and they're actually getting less back that they actually paid for it in the first place. But the point is, government bond is a cast iron, copper-bottomed investment, isn't it? And I would argue that we don't, as I've said, necessarily need to engage in the bond market in the way in which we've been doing, because we could go for direct investment rather than going through a middleman, to raise the fund. I mean, we could actually simply invest in new infrastructure and improved public services rather than actually, selling government bonds, which are often, up until last week, of course, interest yielding to the purchases of those bonds in order to raise the finance. The reason I say that is that the government, as I've already mentioned, is a currency issuing government and doesn't need to raise finance from selling bonds or indeed from raising taxes. But this notion of the economy being the same as a household budget has gained a lot of traction, and it's not been helped by the fact that both main political parties seem to have bought into it. I mean, certainly Brown and Blair bought into that whole notion that the economy is the same as a household budget. Even John McDonnell was constrained by the same misunderstanding of the monetary system. I mean, for example, his fiscal credibility rule that the party was trumpeting was, I think, a mistake, and it fell into that trap of implying that somehow, the economy of Great Britain is like a household budget. we need to raise the finance to pay for our program from taxes. And I know that when it was announced that to great fanfare, there was lots of positive reportage in the mainstream media. But unfortunately, we have this fantasy that the politicians and commentators in the media kind of sort of feed this notion, this fantasy land, that somehow in a currency issuing economy like ours, we have to raise the finance from taxes in order to fund our program. And of course, another problem for me in relation to that fiscal credibility rule that the party adopted when Jeremy was leader and John McDonnell was the shadow chancellor, is that it ceded power to the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, because what the party was arguing was at that time that in extreme circumstances they would be able to break the fiscal credibility rule. But in order to actually break the fiscal credibility rule, they would have had to have got permission to do that from the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. And my response to that would be, who elected them? It's the Chancellor of the Exchequer who is the democratically accountable person, not the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee. So I think that was a mistake, and it also conferred this notion that somehow, we fund our public services through selling bonds and through raising tax revenues. It confers a status on the wealthy individuals in society that they don't deserve. I mean, Alan Sugar was saying that if Jeremy Corbyn was elected to government, he would leave the country, as if he expected all of us to hold our hands up in horror and say, no, please don't go. I would have happily driven him to the airport. We do not need wealthy individuals like Alan Sugar and the rest of them to actually run our program, to run our government and to pay for our public services. So I think it's really important that we kind of understand that the taxes do not pay for our public services. And that's a fact that's been known for, well, the best part of 75 years, if not longer. The former chair of the Federal Reserve, a bloke called Beardsley Rummel, made this clear 75 years ago when he made a speech saying that the state had come off the gold reserve, and after coming off the gold reserve, he said that taxes for revenue expenditure are obsolete. So this has been something which has been known for a considerable number of years, but unfortunately, it seems that politicians and media commentators still seem to be constrained in their thinking. I mean, look, pound sterling has been a fiat currency, a currency which basically floats and isn't backed up by gold as it used to be. It came off out of the Bretton Woods Agreement, which fell apart, well, in 1971 actually, where the pound was and many other currencies around the world for that matter were fixed to the dollar, were linked to the dollar. But that fell apart in 1971. And yet most politicians are still behaving, and media commentators, as if the not just the Bretton Woods Agreement, but the gold standard is still in existence. And look, I know a lot of politicians are behind the curve, but I mean, they're 90 years out of date. I mean, Britain came off the gold standard in 1931. We've been out of the Bretton Woods Agreement for, well, the best part of half a century, 49 years ago. So look, the UK's got monetary sovereignty. We can never run out of money. We're a currency issuing government. So, this notion that somehow, as Dennis Healey implied in 1976 when he went to the IMF, that he needed to go to the IMF because Britain was running out of money, was just a complete falsehood. How can you run out of money when you have the means within your power to issue currency? So, running out of money is not an issue. So money is no object. Let's be clear about that. And when Liam Byrne left his rather silly letter when New Labour left office in 2010 saying there's no money left, it was merely a redundant joke. Of course, money is readily available. Alan Greenspan, the former chair of the US Fed, said that there's nothing to prevent the federal government from creating as much money as it wants and paying it to someone. And I don't know if people, there's a video going around where there was a clip within this video talking about modern monetary theory, where the European Central Bank was holding a press conference, and there was a Swedish journalist put a question to the representatives from the bank, saying that, asking them, could the ECB ever run out of money? And there was an emphatic response, was an emphatic no, they can't run out of money, because the ECB is obviously the central bank for Europe and the Eurozone, and therefore can never run out of money. One of the best decisions that Gordon Brown ever made, of course, was to keep Britain out of the Eurozone, because that then would have ceded our sort of sovereign currency to the European Central Bank, and not we wouldn't have had retained control over our currency ourselves. So, look, our government can therefore as much pound sterling as it wants, whenever it wants, for whatever it wants to do. The government can purchase anything that's available for sale in pound sterling without causing inflation. But that doesn't mean that the government can spend willy-nilly without any constraints whatsoever. The issue is that it can be used to spend on spare capacity. That's the key, really, spare capacity in the economy. And so long as you're kind of spending up to that and using that spare capacity in the economy for goods and services, then you do not cause an inflationary pressure. And this is often a misnomer, which is criticism is often levelled against MMT that it's inflationary. That's actually not the case. And there's also an assertion often made that people who support MMT say you could just spend without any constraint whatsoever. And I don't think anybody who's advocating MMT is advocating that at all. So for me, I think, particular Labour Chancellor, their job should be to use the budget to balance the economy, not the other way around. But that's precisely what, successive governments are doing, particularly the coalition government and the Tory government, 2010 through to the present. They've used that with their austerity measures. They've used that, and the consequences have been absolutely devastating for people, devastating for the economy. It's actually also, had we got into government, what the fiscal credibility rule would have done as well. But the deficit doesn't really matter if we've got a good economy. Our job should be, and particularly those of us who believe in kind of a socialist agenda, should be to create a good society. And I think MMT, using MMT as a lens to understand the monetary system, gives us the tools to be able to do that, to actually improve our infrastructure. Look, our infrastructure is in massive need of investment, isn't it? Up and down the land, you see the poor state of the roads, the potholes, the inadequate rail links. There's a whole huge need for investment in infrastructure, and using MMT, the recognition that we can create the finance to pay for that. And make sure that we, create the capacity. I mean, where there's the only constraint, as I've already mentioned, is capacity in the economy. If we haven't got the skilled labour, then we need to be using our resources to train people up, so that we've got people with the appropriate skills to deliver that infrastructure improvement. But there are many people who are not fully employed at the moment, or unemployed at the moment, who have those skills already. So I think it's about recognizing that we can use the power of the state, use the power of having our own sovereign currency to ensure that we can invest and improve our infrastructure. That generates jobs, it generates a feeling of self-worth, and it creates an economic virtuous circle. And indeed, the need for an investment in a Green New Deal. Similarly, again, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez in the States caused a bit of a stir when she talked about the importance of the Green New Deal in the States, and talked about using MMT as a way of financing it. And I think the point I've made as well about eradicating poverty, if we invested appropriately to ensure that there are adequate welfare programs, we've got like a job guarantee scheme, that we made sure that nobody was in employment that was left in poverty. Get rid of poverty pay. better public services across the piece. I mean, we know that the National Health Service is in need of huge investment, but you then look at local authorities and the massive cuts that they've been subjected to. There's a huge need for investment in our public services right across the piece. And that in itself generates growth, because you're putting money into the pockets of public sector workers. You're putting money into the economy to improve public sector facilities. And so again, I think it's helping to create that economic virtuous circle, eliminating the housing crisis, investing in education. I mean, why is it that kids in the private sector, in the public schools, have a pupil teacher ratio of 5 or 6 to 1, I think it is, isn't it? Whereas in the state sector, we're lucky if it's 30 to 1. Why can't we aspire to have a pupil teacher ratio that's equivalent to the private school sector? I think we should be demanding the very best in state provision in terms of education and across the piece. And of course, the other area, just by way of example, is in social care. Our social care is in near collapse. It's been all but privatized across the land. The workers are paid incredibly badly. The service is nowhere near adequate. People are fleeced if they are infirm, in poor health, and need help to either sustain themselves in the community or have to go into residential care. Why are we allowing that in the 5th biggest economy in the world? And again, to keep reiterating the point, money is no object. It's all about political will. So if tax then isn't needed to fund our public programs, I mean, what's the point of it? Well, obviously tax is needed to generate a value for the currency. If I'd got a £5 note or a £10 note, I could brandish that right now and sort of ask the question, why is it worth that amount of money? Well, in order to generate the value for the currency, you need to tax it, because like the corporations and we as individuals, we need to acquire this money in order to this currency in order to pay our tax liability. So it helps to generate a value for the currency. Taxation also helps to address inequality. I mean, we've got some super rich people in this country, and with the tax cuts that have been made and not reversed by New Labour, when New Labour came into government in 1997, has made already wealthy and powerful people even more wealthy and even more powerful, because power goes with money. And I therefore think that using the taxation regime to address that inequality and to address that power imbalance is also important. And it's also important, of course, to deal with inflationary pressures, as well as to incentivize and disincentivize certain behaviors, disincentivizing speculation, for example, and incentivizing purchasing environmentally friendly vehicles, by way of just 2 examples. Again, just to come back to the point, the key issue is ensuring that we're using spare capacity in the economy. But I think the establishment, has used the public's ignorance of the monetary system, politicians' willful ignorance of the monetary system, to maintain the status quo in the country. And we shouldn't be content with that. Certainly those of us who are socialists, those who believe in in a progressive alternative, we shouldn't be content with crumbs from the table. But that's all we've had, really, even since the 1945 Labour government. We could and indeed should have gone a lot further at that time. And it was Henry Ford who said that it's well enough that people who don't understand the banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there'd be a revolution by tomorrow morning. And I think it's our duty, really, as socialists, to try and bring a wider understanding of the banking and the monetary system, so that we're giving people, if you like, the tools to demand more, to demand better, to demand a fairer share of the nation's wealth. I think it's a trap, frankly, to talk about tax and spend. I've seen so many Labour spokespeople falling into that trap. It was worse under the Miliband era, of course, because anytime any spokesperson went on from the party to talk about Labour's programme, the first question, because we were talking about, the government's cutting too far and too fast, and of course there's going to have to be some cuts, but we want to spend X, Y, and Z on education or in the National Health Service or whatever else. But whenever any of our people went on, the first question the commentators said, well, where are you going to make the cuts? And I just think it's a terrible mistake to actually, fall into that trap of somehow being beholden to the kind of billionaire class and making this point that somehow it's the tax revenues that actually pay for our program. And, I just think how often they're going to fall into this trap. I mean, it's just Labour opposition after Labour opposition are falling into the same trap over and over again. I don't know, when I said it's willful ignorance, it's either this plain ignorance or willful ignorance, but it certainly doesn't serve our purpose. It certainly doesn't serve the purpose, it seems to me, of a socialist alternative. And so if our spokespeople, our representatives in Parliament are unwilling, if you like, to stop falling into that trap, then I think it's up to us to try and change the narrative and to force them to understand what on earth is going on. And I think if we can get a kind of an understanding, and if we could get, you know, our spokespeople in Parliament to embrace MMT and use it as a lens to understand the monetary system, whenever you get, or indeed any of us for that matter, whenever we're sort of challenged by some smart ass commentator with a question about, well, how are you going to pay for X, Y, and Z? I think the appropriate answer should be, well, with money, stupid, how much do you think we're going to pay for it? Because as Tony Benn himself once said, that if we can find money to kill people, we can find money to help people. And I think an understanding of modern monetary theory gives us the tools to be able to do precisely that. Look, if we don't change the narrative, if we don't force this agenda, then my real fear is that when we're through this pandemic, through this COVID-19 crisis, the government will use that as an excuse for another round of potentially even more severe austerity than the austerity that we've witnessed over the last 10 years. And I think that's a huge failing on the part of the Labour movement to not actually, you know, seize this moment to start to change the narrative, to start to raise people's expectations, raise people's understanding of the monetary system. And if we do that, I think we've got a fighting chance of actually making the difference that we need to make. And look, you know, MMT isn't necessarily a left-wing agenda or a right-wing agenda. I mean, a right-winger could just as easily embrace MMT, but they'd have different policy ambitions than those of us on the left would have. I mean, they might want to spend more on you know, nuclear weapons, or you know, more ships and armies and whatever else. You know, by contrast, you know, we'd be wanting to spend it on social programs to eradicate poverty, to deal with the housing crisis, to deal with the crisis in public services, in social care, and so on. And so, as I say, if it's not going to happen, and there's no evidence really that it is going to happen in terms of getting a better understanding and really holding this government to account, rather than falling into the kind of whole neoliberal consensus which we've been living with over the last 40 years. And even I think under Jeremy, we were constrained to a large extent in terms of our narrative by those neoliberal parameters. I think we need to break through them. And I think it's going to be up to us at the grassroots level to really make this argument and make the case for a different approach to the monetary system, a different approach to the economy, and a different approach which will enable us then, I think, to demonstrate that a different approach, a different government could actually deliver the changes the country desperately needs, could actually address the scandal of poverty in this country and inequality in Britain, and actually ensure that everybody in the UK enjoys the fruits of the economy, the fifth biggest, let's remember, in the world. And it's a scandal that the way we have so many people who are languishing on the sidelines in a state of poverty when there is so much riches available in the land.
Thank you very much, Chris. You did ask me, and I forgot to say it, that you see yourself as a layman on the issue, and I should have said that, but I think you did rather well. There's been a heated discussion already in our chat about, you know, is MMT part of the Marxist understanding of economy, etc. So, and I'm sure Michael will address those issues now, and I'm spotlighting you now.
Yes, indeed. And I don't know if Chris is a layman. I thought that was a very compelling account he gave of the modern monetary theory and how it might be applied to government policy at the moment. And I couldn't agree more with him that we have to turn away from the policies of austerity that have been adopted not only over the last 10 years since the Great Recession under both Labour and Conservative governments, but also going way back to the days when James Callahan said that we can no longer spend our way out of a recession. And that was in 1979. Those of us who are as young as me can remember that speech. And so we've been with this argument that we have to have a policy of making ends meet, that you can only spend what you've got as income, like a household, as an argument for governments not intervening in the economy and trying to improve the lot of people, to end poverty, to solve the housing crisis, to provide decent public services, a whole range of things, which obviously in the labour movement, that's what we're struggling to get there. And I think in that sense, there is no disagreement between me and Chris. I think the argument really is going to come down to whether modern monetary theory provides us with a sufficient policy to achieve those targets, or whether it falls short. In the emergency that we're in at the moment, there is absolutely no case for saying that we should not spend money and monetarily finance that. For those who are not sure what that means, is that the government should spend to provide decent safety net and income for people who are being locked down or are losing their jobs or being furloughed, and for small businesses as well. And it's not a question of raising more debt in terms of issuing bonds, but the government can just get the Bank of England to deposit amounts in the government coffers for them to spend that. And so there's absolutely no argument in favour of trying to hold down the budget in this emergency situation. I think the real question is what happens over the longer term once we come out of this pandemic, and is the solution to all the problems that the labour movement faces, or at least the basic ones in terms of employment, public services, the things that Chris has outlined, going to be resolved in some way through spending by the government who have the power to issue money at will in order to achieve that. And if I can, Chair, I just want to bring in a few graphs. Those who know Michael Roberts knows that he has 1,000 graphs for everything he does. So I'm going to present a few now, if the share works. I'm starting off by arguing that I want to pose a rather stark alternative between modern monetary theory and modern Marxist theory, if you like. And basically, as Chris has said, MMT says you can reverse austerity. But in my view, it's the deficit financing, budget type deficit financing, and printing as much money as necessary to achieve that is trying to reverse austerity without doing anything about the social structure of capitalism at all. It's a novel theoretical justification for permanent deficit financing. Because the state controls money as a unit of account, there's no limit on the spending that it can make. And you can never run out of money if you mean by that you can just print money, or you can put it in the form of deposits and credits into various institutions as the government controls the pound, or the US controls the dollar and prints it and issues as much as it wants in conjunction with its central bank. So in that sense, there is no limit to what it can spend. But the only point that Chris has made is the constraint when you reach the end of spare capacity, then you might have inflation, then it's time to tax. That's the argument. So it's a question of the solution, apparently, to the problems that we face for the labour movement is the government to spend up to the level of the end of spare capacity, if it runs up a deficit, and then to start to tax, and all will be resolved. Well, if that's right, then all we need to do to keep a capitalist system going is apparently to have more government deficits. The only difference between what orthodox Keynesians say and what modern monetary theory says, that we don't have to cover those deficits, not by taxes, because both all Keynesians and modern monetary theorists agree that taxes are not the only thing you can use to spend, but they don't have to be financed by government bonds either, for which the banks buy. The central bank can just print that money. And I agree, that's absolutely the case. In that sense, because banks actually create money, then when they lend to households or they lend to businesses, they create money because deposits appear in the households as a result of the loan, and they appear in the businesses as the result of the loan to the businesses as well. So in that sense, money is actually created by the decisions of households or entrepreneurs to spend. And so money is not so much an exogenous forced, coming from outside by the state, but actually is a product of how much demand there is to spend or to invest, depending whether it's households or businesses. So in that sense, if that's what modern monetary theory is saying, all we're doing is saying like it is, and that's like it is. But actually, modern monetary theory is saying more than that. It's saying that the state creates money in order to receive it for the payment of taxes. The state can force taxes out of citizens and then decide the nature of the legal tender that serves for that money. So money is a product of the state. As I say, MMT goes further than just saying how money is created by the state. It's arguing that there's a circuit of money that goes from state money to other entities, then it's taxed and back to state money. And so it injects money into the private sector, which is then reabsorbed by the collection of taxes. So if a government issues a fiscal deficit and spends more than it receives in taxes, then the non-state sector has a surplus which it can use to invest, spend, and employ. So the state running a deficit and creating more money gives the opportunity for the private sector, which in this case means the households and businesses, to spend if they are given those funds to do so, and the taxes doesn't have to follow at that particular point. But I want to say that there's something different. This position of modern monetary theory is different from what Marx says about the theory of money. Marx says that money doesn't come through state creating it. It's emerged over historically through the exchange between businesses, between traders, in order to exchange commodities. And as that's become generalized across the world globally as the main means of which you produce things for sale. You no longer produce them to consume yourselves. You produce them to sell, to transact, to trade with other people. Then the necessity of money takes that form. The state can take control of that particular money form, whether it's a pound or a dollar, but it hasn't actually invented the money itself. That's already appeared. As Marx says, it crystallizes out of the process of exchange in which different products are in fact converted into commodities and transformed. So that's an important difference between modern monetary theory and the Marxist theory of money, that money comes from the capitalist process of production for exchange for sale, and not because the state creates it. The state can decide the unit of account. It can even issue as much a unit of the account as it wishes, but the money must appear in the process of labor being used and turned into commodities. So banks can create money, but not as something that makes finance capital separate from capitalist production. It's all part of the same process. And ultimately, the demand for money is set by the pace of accumulation by the capitalists investing and by how much they want to consume, and also by how much workers consume. It's the demand for money which sets the process of how much is going to be supplied and whether that supply meets the needs of the population. So in a Marxist view, money only has value because there's value in production to back it, not because the government prints as much as it wants. Yes, the government can never run out of money, but if that money doesn't actually produce value in terms of new products, new services, incomes for people, then really all you're doing is printing a unit of account that doesn't have the purchasing power that it had before. So government spending on its own cannot create that value unless it is used to produce more things. It actually produces value in production. And that's the key to understanding the nature, the difference, it seems to me, between modern monetary theory and Marxist monetary theories. There's no credibility. If you keep printing money and there's no value being created, then eventually the credibility of that money will decline, as it has in Venezuela, as it did in Germany in the 1920s, or Zimbabwe, or even in Argentina now. You end up with an inflationary spiral because there's no value being created to match the amount of money, the unit of account that the government's printing. So the problem with MMT is it ignores the most crucial factor of all, as far as I'm concerned as a Marxist, and I think any socialist would say, the social structure of capitalism. Capitalism is production and investment for profit, not for meeting the needs of people. And profit depends on the ability to exploit the working class sufficiently compared to the investment in technology and productive assets. It does not depend on whether the government has provided enough effective demand in the amount of money it's printed. As I want to show, and you can choose this slogan, you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. And as Michael Pettis, a Keynesian economist, said recently, the bottom line is this: if the government can spend these additional funds in the way that make GDP grow faster than debt, then we don't have to worry about inflation. but only if this money is used productively will it be successful. Creating or borrowing money, so either printing it or getting bonds from the government, does not increase the country's wealth unless it leads to an increase in productive investment. And if companies are not willing to invest because the cost of capital is too high or profitability is too low, then they won't, and the investment won't take place. And that's key, because we live in a capitalist economy, not in a socialist one. We are not, the government is not deciding the direction of resources and investment and employment. Basically, all those decisions are being made on the whole by capitalist companies, and they will decide whether you get a job, what wage you get, what the investment will take place, depending on the profitability of that company and many companies. Here's a little graph for viewers to consider. Briefly, on the vertical column is the size of the unemployment rate, and on the lateral column line is the government spending to GDP, and all the red dots are different countries in the OECD economies over a period of time. And it shows that the higher the government spending by a country, the actual higher the unemployment, which seems to work opposite of what Keynesian policy would say, and for that matter, modern monetary theory. And why is that? The answer is that if the economy is going down, if capitalists are not investing, if they're reducing production, unemployment goes up, governments respond by trying to cope with this, as we're seeing in the current situation, by spending more, running budget deficits in order to try and compensate for this collapse in production and investment. And they don't have much success in doing that if capitalists do not wish to invest. So if there's a capitalist slump in production and investment, government spending can only do very little in ameliorating that. In fact, say you get a correlation between higher government spending and higher unemployment. Doesn't mean to say that higher government spending is causing higher unemployment. It is that higher unemployment leads to reaction into higher government spending. So that tells me, and it should tell everybody, that what matters is what's going on in the capitalist sector of the economy, not how much money is being printed by the government. Another rather complicated graph, I briefly want to argue, the blue block tells you if you spend more money, how much real growth you get. Sorry, that's the red block, how much more money if government spends more money, will there be an increase in real GDP growth 1-to-1? If the profitability of the capitalist sector rises, is there an increase in growth 1-to-1? And you can see in most of the periods that we've seen over the last 50 years, it depends on what's happening to the change in the profitability to the capitalist sector, not how much the government is increasing government expenditure over that period. There is no correlation between government expenditure and growth. There is a strong correlation between an increase in profitability and growth and vice versa. So because the capitalist sector rules, not the government. The capitalist sector rules, and they decide whether there's going to be growth, employment, and investment. So the key policy, by the way, which the MMT puts forward as part of its policy program is a job guarantee. Everybody will be guaranteed a job if they want it. The government will print as much money and it will employ them on these projects and pay them to get a job. Because most people work for capitalist companies, and if unemployment remains, then the government needs to act as a way of trying to pick up the overall rise in unemployment, a bit like what would happen if we continue with high unemployment at the moment and the government intervenes to provide jobs for people. So it becomes the employer of last resort. In my opinion, that is, we have to do that, but it's a backstop to capitalism. It's saying capitalism has failed. It's not producing the jobs that people need, at the incomes they require. It's not producing the services they need. The government will come in and clear up the mess in the back, like clearing up the people who have fallen by the wayside through the failure of the market, not really actually providing a lead to change the whole situation and the social structure. There's a big quote here from Bill Mitchell, who's a very big MMT person, globally everywhere, and he says, what the government's job to do under MMT is to build up jobs to absorb workers who are unable to find employment in the private sector. And the government should be aiming to provide employment for these people and pay them a minimum wage, which will give you a floor for the economy. So, but we don't want to compete with the private market. We're only picking up those people the private sector doesn't want to employ at any reasonable amount. So we end up with a policy based on spending money from the government, printing money from the government to provide employment and soak up the spare capacity that Chris has mentioned, merely at raising people to the barest minimum wage in a job guarantee. That seems to be way, way short of what we as socialists should be fighting for and trying to get out of this economy. As Mariana Mazzucato has said, not a Marxist, but has said recently, the job of government, in my opinion, is not to fix the failures of the market when they arrive. We should be moving to actively shaping, creating a situation that delivers sustainable and inclusive growth. And MMT doesn't do that. It just says, if you print money, we can get more jobs and people, at least if at a minimum level, and until we get spare capacity used up. And then if the private sector takes over again, we stand back and we carry on as though the private sector has not been altered in one way. It is a magic money tree if it means that all it does is restore capitalism to a certain level and capitalism continues. It will lead to households spending money and capitalists investing is the argument. But under MMT, the banks would still remain. The big 5 banks in the UK would not be touched by MMT policy. The big pharmaceutical companies who have failed so abysmally in this COVID pandemic to provide the medical and the medicines and the vaccines that could have saved this situation will still be there. MMT says nothing about that. The fossil fuel companies will still be there. MMT says nothing about that. All the big companies, like all the Amazons and Netflix and Google and all those who pay no tax, who carry on operating the way they do, exploiting people at low levels of wages, which will be the floor which MMT will presumably set for anybody who hasn't got a job. They still remain, nothing changes there. And the stock market rolls on. Only today we see it racing back to where it was before this pandemic started because of the huge amount of money being piled in and injected to help finance sector, the banks and the big companies to recover in the US and elsewhere. So no change in the social structure of capitalist economies like the UK or the US under the policy of MMT. It's a very limited and narrow policy, it seems to me. We need more than just fixing capitalism with the help of the state financed by this magic monetary tree. MMT assumes that government spending can be expanded to any level necessary to achieve full employment, and it can assume that capitalism will be saved, and that capitalism will then presumably continue on harmonious growth and full employment. What about all the slumps we keep having every 10 years? What about the serious situation that exists in many countries of the world where they don't have control over their currency and can't just print money as they like? Is MMT the godsend for those countries, for those governments? Is it the godsend for this country if it doesn't have the opportunity to change the social relations of exploitation for labor? In other words, it's actually saying we maintain the social relations as we are now, we come up with a bit of a money trick that the government can exploit to try and help those who are unemployed at the bottom of the ladder, but we change nothing at all. So in that way, it's not really a very modern theory at all. What would be an alternative? My Marxist policy would be, on the one hand, yes, we need emergency government spending on investment and jobs funded by deficits and central bank financing now, because this is an emergency. We can't wait for the changes. We need to save people's jobs and incomes and livelihoods. But really, this labour movement should be fighting not for permanent money printing and deficits, but for taking the lead in controlling and directing investment, production and jobs. So that the capitalist sector and markets are not in control, but the government, the people, can direct investment and plan for the people. Public ownership of the banks and strategic industries must be part of any such plan. MMT offers no question, one way or the other. It says nothing about that issue. A fully public health service and education system, a publicly owned run and building corporation, universal basic services free at the point of use. MMT people say, well, yes, well, that's a different policy. The governments have to think about that once we've given them the money. Well, that's not the issue. The money will not be in their hands unless the government's hands, unless they have control of the major sectors of the economy. Otherwise, it's just going to be handing over to businesses to decide whether they want to carry out anything along those lines. And we need something international. MMT is very much idea that the dollar can be printed indefinitely without any problem, or the pound can be imprinted indefinitely without any problem, but there's no international plan for really a sustainable economic recovery. MMT doesn't offer us that. It offers very simply the issue that you can run a budget deficit. You don't need to issue bonds to do it. The central bank can print money for you. But otherwise, it changes nothing about the nature of the capitalist economy, and therefore, in my view, does not deliver sustainable and harmonious growth without slumps and recessions in the future.
Thank you very much, Michael. So Chris William wants to save capitalism. No, I'm sure you get back to your chance to reply to it. It's
I'm quite a lot to say in response to that.
Actually, I'm quite happy to give you now 5-10 minutes if you want before we open up the debate. Do you want to?
Well, okay, then briefly then, because obviously I know that a lot of people are wanting to get in. But I think Michael has made the mistake of sort of suggesting that somehow, you know, MMT is a prescription for all ills, and talks about it, you know, propping up capitalism. Those decisions are separate. All MMT is a lens to understand the monetary system. If we want to, and I certainly do want to change the balance of power in the country, I want to see more public ownership. I want to see greater control with workers being given the right to run their own companies. These are all issues that are, you know, policy decisions that the government can make outside of that. You know, MMT doesn't really, you know, prescribe any of those things as far as I can see. It merely is, as I've said, a lens to understand the way the monetary system operates in the country. And another quick word, if I may, about growth and GDP anyway, because I think we also need a better measure of economic success than gross domestic product, because it seems to me a very poor way of determining the success of an economy when, as I've said in my opening remarks, we have so many people living in poverty, and surely a better measure would include the elimination or the reduction in poverty, for example, and you know, life expectancy rates and things like that. So, you know, for me, I think the way that Michael has characterized MMT is part of what he was saying. I think it is a bit unfair. And I think the other point as well about the job guarantee scheme, again, in terms of saying, well, you know, just taking people up to subsistence level, not necessarily. I mean, that might be one prescription, but you might say no. And as far as I'm aware, all the MMT advocates that I've ever seen, that they don't talk about bringing people up to a subsistence level with a job guarantee scheme, but actually bringing people up to a proper decency threshold so that people can, you know, play a full part in society, be able to, you know, participate and go out for an evening, perhaps for the odd meal and have a holiday. And really in the same way that, you know, people who are enjoying, you know, good salaries in my own home city, for example, people who are working in the manufacturing sector in Derby, although Rolls-Royce is under extreme pressure at the moment, and that's a lot of redundancies. But the salaries that they enjoyed, and people working in the railway and so on in my home city, they have a quite a decent standard of living because they enjoy a good salary. And I think what we need to ensure is with any job guarantee scheme is that it wasn't just as a subsistence level, it's as a proper decency level to enable people to play a full part in society.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to ask some comrades to switch on their video so they can ask some questions. Just want to say a couple of things because there's been a flurry of messages on Facebook as well as on the chat here, which is certainly, we're entering a period of renewed attacks on the working class economically for sure, but also politically. And in that context, I'm very sad to say that David Evans has just been voted through by the NEC of the Labour Party as the new General Secretary. We'll probably see some more vicious attacks on the left, and the witch hunt has already intensified in the last couple of weeks. I think it's a real shame that Jeremy Corbyn did not use the opportunity to transform the Labour Party when he had the chance. I doubt the right has the same problems doing it now. We urge in the Labour Left Alliance, we urge comrades that if you're allowed to stay in the Labour Party and you can stomach it, please do stay in the Labour Party. But do join with comrades in a collective fight back, join the Labour Left Alliance, join Labour Against the Witch Hunt. Both groups do accept members who've now resigned, but we do have a political orientation to the Labour Party. The key thing in my view is that we discuss these issues collectively, we work together collectively like we're doing now. Chris has left the Labour Party, which I think was a mistake, but we are still comrades. You know, we're discussing these political questions properly together collectively and trying to work towards the solution and the coming fight back, and it will be harsh. Anyway, I'm bringing in Liv first from sunny Spain. Hello. Unmuted now, I think. Oh no, you're still muted, sorry. I'm trying to unmute you. I think you have to do it yourself. So I'm bringing in Phil first, maybe. Phil, can you
hi.
quickly jump in?
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is a massive issue which asks a lot more questions. So the first thing I'd like to try and get people to get over this sort of MMT versus Marxism thing, because I think they both have sensible things to say. If we think MMT is just the idea that states create money and taxation destroys money, like as Chris explained, then that's obviously correct. Now, criticising it, sorry, I've got my daughter in, criticising it to say that it doesn't explain everything and solve every policy problem is a bit of a silly criticism. Like if you're trying to build a rocket to the moon, you wouldn't say, oh, but gravity doesn't tell us how to build the rocket or how to navigate it. No, it doesn't. But it's a very good thing to be aware of and to understand if that's what you're trying to do. So we need to be aware of MMT, and it's not a new idea. Like monetary circuit theory and neo-Keynesians have been talking about this for 60 or 70 years at least in these terms. But MMT has obviously popularised the whole thing a lot, and in that it's good. Now the other thing is we shouldn't think Marxism has all the answers about this. Marx wrote 150 years ago when we were on the gold standard, we didn't have bond markets and shadow banking. There's a huge amount of stuff that if you stick to what Marx wrote, you'll just end up waving your hands at it all and just say, oh, that's capitalism, let's not look at it any closer. There's a huge amount going on that we need to analyse in new ways that Marx didn't even imagine. So let's not think that all the answers exist there. Now, there's some interesting questions posed to me about, I mean, I think there is a limit to MMT, obviously, and that you get inflation in the end. So you do have to have taxation to control inflation. And a great thing that Marx did say about money is that he recognised money as a power relation in the class structure of society. So MMT, if you start spending lots of money, you're going to have to start taxing a lot. And this brings up the class question, because there are limited resources in society, and the main limited resource is human labour. If you want every poor person to have a better life, it means that the rich have got to stop consuming so much of our labour. We can also try and increase efficiency and stuff, but at some point you're going to increase productivity, and then you have to start saying these people are going to consume less and these people are going to consume more. It does come down to class question, and it obviously comes down to questions of policy. And there are some people who think MMT is some sort of panacea. They're obviously wrong. It does come down to class politics at the end of the day. Yeah, I won't take up too much more time. I've also can't. One thing I'd recommend people read if they're new to this sort of stuff, I don't know if you can see that, it's J.K. Galbraith's book, Money, about the history of money. David Grieber's book's been mentioned, that's also very good, but I love this book. It's very readable if you're not an economist. And if you are an economist, have a look at Silvio Gesell's work, because I think he's said a lot about money that Marx never did. All right, thank you.
Poor Phil, sorry.
I've got a small child.
Pushing him out of the picture, funny. Okay, comrades, I can see, hello, lots of people are making comments in the chat, but you're not putting all attendees. So if you want to reach everybody, please make sure that you choose all attendees. Okay, Liv, I think your microphone works now.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes. Great,
okay, thanks. Thank you for 2 really interesting talks. My question, and I would also like to say that Galbraith's book that was just recommended, I also would recommend that, really good book on understanding banking, particularly for the non-economist. My question actually is around how independent is our sovereign currency, because the whole of the of MMT, as I understand it, is based on our sovereign currency. But how independent is it? You know, when you look at how international trade works, how international banking works, it's the Americans, isn't it, who control the levers of, you know, financial power. All international transactions are settled through SWIFT. So if a British government were to implement, let's say it was the Labour government who were to implement modern monetary theory with a socialist agenda, how independent would it actually be? I mean, wouldn't the Americans use their financial power to prevent it actually happening? That's my question to you.
I'm bringing in Peter Kennedy now, who's actually going to address our webinar on June the 9th on the nature of finance capitalism, which will be interesting. Hello.
Hi there.
Hi.
Yeah, just a question on this MMT. Just curious about why it's so important now. Who's driving it? Is it any different from Keynesianism in the past? Have we not learned the lessons from the past, by the way? So, will there not be a run on the pound? Will there not be a threat, of the capital flight just as there was in the past? Can, the UK be can any nation be an island to carry out this MMC policy? It seems to be very idealist and not really based on, class, the class realities of capitalism right now. I can see that, printing money is going to be great if you want to kind of give people more money to spend, overcome, the stingy welfare benefits that we have right now, and maybe generate some short-term employment. But, I can see that as a kind of reformist policy. But I also see how it worked in the past, and so I'm wondering whether, on the one hand, I'm thinking, well, better to do that rather than leave everything the way it is, austerity-wise. But at the same time, if we want to bring the working class with us and not to bring in to a certain situation which then leads to their defeat again when we have a crisis over the currency or we have to raise interest rate. One of the things here that I noticed is that everyone just thought like, well, it's going to be okay, MMT, until we hit spare capacity. Well, it's not going to be okay long before that, And so, okay, is this like a learning lesson for the, to politicize the working class? Great if it is. But all I can see is kind of bureaucrats who are, distant from the working class, who think, well, this is like a smart idea that we've got, to generate money and, to use debt, which is fine, but it has an impact on class struggle. And if we don't prepare the working class for the kind of confrontation that this will lead to, then, we're not, in the short term, great, we can give some sort of palliative welfare. in the long term, it'll lead to the defeat of the working class, just like it did in social democracy. You know, what we found out with it was, you know, around the Labour Party and the, you know, the social democracy from 45 to the mid-70s, is that, one, it politicizes the working class, but two, it doesn't like offer them a kind of platform to deliver socialism. It kind of invents the idea that social democracy is in fact the socialist heartland. And it led to misery, it led to the depoliticization of labour. In fact, it led to finance capital. And I'll be talking about that next week.
Thank you, Peter. Diana is unsure if her microphone works. We'll try it out now. Can you try speaking? No, it does not work. You're unmuted and it doesn't work. So I read out your question, okay? Okay, your question is, surely we need to dump the obsession with economic growth. Most economic theories ignore the fact that we live in an anatural world on a finite planet, i.e. they are human-centric. Wasn't Marx into ecology? What did he have to say about growth? Shouldn't we dump all measures of growth? Interestingly, we're going to have a contribution now from Alan Gibson, who will address one of our forthcoming webinars on this question on Marx and ecology, which I'm very much looking forward to. So, Alan, fire away.
Okay, I've been listening with interest to this discussion, and I was thinking about the topic of the session, can modern monetary theory solve COVID-19 and the crisis of capitalism? And who cares? Is my answer. And there's been something strange as well, which I often find in discussions around the economy and what might be done about to make capitalism less aggressive and less exploitative, to get fairer shares, better redistribution through taxes and so on. And that is the use of we, of us and our. Because in this discussion I've noticed, perhaps unfairly, I'm not sure, but that the we has been sometimes meant to mean perhaps we the Labour Party or we working people, but it's also quite often been meant to mean we as in the nation of Britain. I don't live in Britain, but I hear it often where I live now, Ireland, the same we is used. And I think that's quite problematic, particularly when there's a discussion which is also referencing socialism. Because socialism, certainly in the sense which Marx projected it, is a post-capitalist society. There is no private ownership of the means of production. There is no private ownership and control of the processes of production, distribution and exchange. And in a technical Marxist sense, there is no money, because exchange value and exchange is something which has been consigned to the dustbin of history. So people have been trying to defend modern monetary theory as not being trying to make capitalism better, but that seems to be exactly the context within which it has been discussed. And okay, maybe modern monetary theory could make capitalism better if you're able to abstract that away from the reality of the massive recession, perhaps depression, which the COVID-19 pandemic has tipped capitalism into on an international level. But I don't see how there's going to be any option for the capitalist class other than massive austerity. That's how they dealt with the last recession, which is, I think, historically would be seen as smaller and less significant than this one. It's also, on the question of the last nearly speaker, was about the more general context. And I remember, I think Chris referenced the problems of climate change and ecological collapse at the beginning. There's no, I mean, the pandemic has to be understood in that context, and there's going to be no returning to some kind of concept of a capitalism where this idea of meting out a fairer share and a booming economy, that's not the world we now live in. We live in a world of more extreme weather events, of more pandemics, of increasing destitution of large sections of the world due to climate change, the collapse of farming due to the destruction caused by industrial farming methods. We're entering a period where, even if one could accept in theory that modern monetary theory could be get a more benign form of capitalism, and that was what socialism was about, that how we used that word was getting a more benign form of capitalism, where our share as workers of the overall production was greater than it might be under neoliberal capitalism. But that isn't the world we're living in. And so I find this discussion slightly strange in that regard. And it's talking about something in theory which has nothing to do with the reality, which we're going to meet immediately as part of the back to work, as the immediate consequences of the coronavirus are dealt with. And it certainly has nothing to do with the next couple of decades as we face the question of, can we get rid of capitalism and avert catastrophic ecological collapse? Finish.
Thank you. Michael and Chris, do you want to come in now, or shall we have a few more speakers? Sorry, you were both muted. I couldn't hear what you were saying.
If Michael wants to maybe go first, as I will.
Yeah, I've just asked to answer a few of the points that have come up so far, and also some of the chat lines and questions that I've been trying to follow alongside there. Modern monetary theory, somebody said, criticised me for saying I've put it forward too simplistically. It's much more, how can I put it, more sophisticated than I argued. As I understand it, and I don't think we can, I think it's reasonably accurate, it's really saying that governments can print money, they can spend more, they don't have to worry about the level of taxation, they can spend more, they can print money, and using those deficits, they can then provide the opportunity with demand for jobs by giving that money to the private sector in some form, either directly to households or to companies, so that they then start employing people. And we get what is called a traditional Keynesian demand management policy. You run deficits in order to increase demand, and then the capitalist supply side will come forward and we will move forward to full employment. If that doesn't work too well, maybe we'll have some public works as well. So in that sense, modern monetary theory is the same as Keynesian theory. The only difference between traditional Keynesian theory was that they said the deficit should be, as it were, covered by borrowing, by issuing bonds, and the banks and the private sector buy those bonds. Modern monetary theory is saying you don't have to do that. You just print the money, you can keep interest rates down, and therefore you can expand towards achieving full employment. But otherwise, it's basically the same idea as the Keynesian demand management theory. My argument about that is, fine if you want to get some out of a recession or an emergency like now, that may be necessary in the short term, but it changes nothing about the social structure of an economy. And the social structure of the economy we live in is a capitalist economy where the majority of investment and employment and production decisions, both nationally and internationally, are made by huge multinational companies and banks. And if spending money by governments, whether it's a national government or even more, but generally we're talking about national governments, is just going to be insignificant in trying to change the policies and the attitudes of those institutions in the capitalist sector if they see no profit in it. And the point I made about my graphs was that when profitability is low, it doesn't matter how much spending you pump in order to try and get the economy going, it doesn't deliver. And the idea that that's the solution to a capitalist slump, and that we can use this modern monetary theory or Keynesian demand management to solve a problem that capitalism has created in terms of a slump, is going to mislead the labour movement. Keynes was no friend of the labour movement. He was strongly opposed to socialism. There's nothing, not an essence, not a single line in modern monetary theory about a socialist transformation of a society. What it's saying is we have a capitalist system, we can make it work better by getting the government to spend money and print money to boost employment where the market sector on its own is failing. It's a typical Keynesian position. Somebody mentioned Silvio Gesell as our solution, where your money runs out of having any value, so you've got to spend it quickly. Gesell was very popular with Keynes. He wrote about it all the time. So the idea always is, let's get demand up so that people spend money and businesses spend money. We do that by giving the government to spend more. MMT says you don't have to issue bonds to do that. That's all they're saying. It's a very extra point to be made, but not very significant when it comes to actually changing society. Does that end slumps? Will that end the next recession? Will it get us out of this one even? Just spending more money? We shall see, but in my view, it won't, if the profitability of capitalism is what's the important thing that decides everything. Until we have more control, significant and dominant control over the means of production and planning for the labour force that they get employment, then we cannot change that situation and avoid future slumps. MMT then, in a way, becomes just one small tool in the weapon of the government to transform society, which depends on transformation of the means of production, ending the significant control of the private ownership of the means of production by the big companies. There's nothing in that. All the proponents of MMT, these top economists in America and elsewhere in Australia, and I quoted a few of them in my presentation, none of them refer to the private ownership of the means of production and doing anything about that. All they're interested in is finding a way to sort of help the private sector to respond to when it goes into these slumps. The Keynesian solution, in my view, never worked anyway. It certainly didn't work in the 70s. The capitalism gave it up. Right-wingers are quite happy to use Keynesian policies as we see now. And as Chris said, they're quite happy to use MMT if it helps capitalism get going. But so MMT is not offering us an alternative to the way in which society is run now: exploitation by labour, regular slumps, poverty around the world. And as one person said, do we want to grow more just for the sake of it? No, but we do want to get people out of poverty worldwide, which is increasing by 50 million in the course of this slump. And it's not going to be resolved just by government spending more money and using the printing press to do so.
I mean, I think using the term, printing money is a bit of a loaded term anyway, and gives kind of a distorted view about what those people who are advocating MMT are actually talking about. And the kind of reforms that Michael's on about, that it's saying it doesn't sort of have a view about. I mean, that's, again, as I've already made the point, that's a separate issue in many ways. And I support Michael. I'm sure, both of us would agree that, we do need to do something about the levers of control and of the means of production. And I'm a very strong advocate of worker cooperatives, and I think we should be doing more in that regard. But to suggest that public spending can't actually tackle or prevent a slump, I think is flies in the face of some of the evidence. I mean, let's take two examples of China and Australia. I mean, China obviously was an export-led market, and then when the great financial crash came, that all but dried up. But they changed their system around to growing internal markets, as it were, to sustain. And they all but sort of avoided any kind of more of a glancing blow than a significant impact of the great financial crash that impacted so heavily on places like the States and the UK and other Western countries. And of course, Australia is another example that has run a huge deficit for best part 50 years, as I understand it. And they similarly didn't actually experience a recession as a consequence of the great financial crash. And a few people made the point that if a future Labour or alternative government come to power, socialist government. I'm not sure Labour Party is ever going to deliver socialism in this country. I think we may need an alternative vehicle at some point. That could result in capital flight to run on the pound and so on. Well, I mean, whether or not MMT is kind of neither here or there in that sense. If that was going to happen, it wouldn't be as a consequence of MMT. It would be as a consequence of a political decision being taken to try and smash a progressive socialist administration. But there are tools available, capital controls, for example. I mean, look at Iceland. I know it's a small country, but you know, they came through the great financial crash, and there was huge pressure put on them, but they introduced capital controls and so on, and you know, their currency is actually gaining value. So I think there are levers that are available, and Michael will know more about those levers than I do. But I don't think we were necessarily left helpless. And this other point about you know, economic growth is something which is potentially a bad thing because we only have one planet. But you know, economic growth doesn't necessarily have to result in the further degradation of the planet and the environment. I mean, investing in our public services, as I've already pointed out, investing in a Green New Deal would drive economic growth, but wouldn't be done in a way that would cause further damage to the planet. And I'm a very strong environmentalist, and have been for, well, all my adult life, actually. I'm a vegan, and I'll recommend anybody who's watching who isn't a vegan, who's concerned about the environment, that's a big contribution that you can make by going vegan. But no, I mean, I think there are a range of ways in which we can get good growth, and we need to do that. We need to kind of, you know, move away from the system of economic growth, which has been so damaging. I think the final point that was made about it inevitably leading to inflation. Again, I don't think there's necessarily any evidence for that, so long as you are ensuring that you're not overspending where you haven't got the capacity available to be able to meet that, the productive capacity to be able to meet that spend. And that's not just to simply say, let's use the spare capacity that is available now. There's plenty of spare capacity. There's plenty of things that need to be done. Just look around where you live now at the state of the public infrastructure, the state of the public services, the public parks and all the rest of it. There are a huge amount of things that need to be done that we could put people to work actually, you know, addressing those areas of shortfall. But then by investing in the economy, you know, you can kind of create that, as I've already mentioned, that kind of economic virtuous circle. So it's not a static thing that you suddenly, you know, get up to that level and, oh, that's it, you can't go any further. You kind of create a situation where you are you know, increasing that capacity all the time. And I honestly do believe, I'm a bit surprised in some ways that Michael doesn't feel that, you know, an interventionist government hasn't got the ability to be able to influence the situation in that way. Those of us on the left, I always thought, you know, we did believe that, you know, there was a role of the state to intervene and to make a difference to ensure that, you know, the economy was working in the interest of the majority rather than working in the interest of the tiny few elites. And as I say, I think MMT gives us a tool, gives us a lens to have a better understanding of the monetary system, to then deploy it to deliver the kind of socialist agenda that I suspect most of the people, if not everybody that's watching this program tonight, wants to see.
Thank you, Chris. We've got 5 more speakers from the floor. Can we please try and keep it to about 3 minutes now? Bringing Paul first, and then Patricia. There you go, you're unmuted. Very close to the camera, Paul.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Before the session started, I thought I was actually in favour of MMT. But I must admit, after hearing Michael Roberts talk, to give the Marxist perspective, the more I'm convinced that MMT as a theory, perhaps I'm being unfair, but I would call it a so-called theory, because from a socialist perspective, I'm kind of thinking it's more of a distraction. I mean, if we talk about spare capacity in the economy and the kind of things we'd like to do, surely that got nothing to do with MMT. That's just about how we think as a society and where we should go. You don't need a new monetary theory to do that. I don't wish to be unkind, but that's what I got from the session. And I certainly know from people I've had discussions with on MMT that and Michael Roberts alluded to, I think, is that not everyone advocates MMT as left-wing. I've come across quite a few right-wing MMT supporters, and I'm not convinced. I think it's a system whereby everybody talks about themselves about this one thing, and I think it's a distraction from the kind of society that we as socialists want to see. I mean, Chris mentioned about the kind of things that China did with their economy, and I'm thinking, yeah, but China is a totalitarian state, and of course, it's what some Marxists would refer to as state capitalist. It sits on all the assets, so it can do what it wants, and I think that's the key. I think people say, well, banks or government can print money, but of course, in capitalism, it's the banks and the government that sit on the assets. So when things go wrong, it's the government and the capitalist systems that have got their assets to fall back on. The working class as a collective don't have assets, do they? All they've got is their own labour that they can fall back on, and the various civic organisations that they might be taking part in. So, yes, I'm much more persuaded by the arguments that Michael Roberts was putting to say that actually MMT isn't actually anything new. In fact, it's, I suppose, I think as Michael already said, it's basically recycled Keynesianism. And of course, Keynes admitted himself that Keynesianism did have its limits. And I suppose MMT is another way of expressing it. But I realise after tonight I'm no clear as to what the theory actually means.
Okay, Paul.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you. I'm bringing in Patricia now, who I believe is running a podcast on MMT, I'm told.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. I wanted to talk about a little bit of some of the things that have been mentioned here. I think we may be speaking at cross purposes, because MMT only has one prescription politically about the job guarantee and nothing else. It is literally just a description of how money works. It doesn't tell us how to escape capitalism. It doesn't tell us whether we should be socialists or whether we should be libertarians. And therefore you will find a lot of variety in the people that support MMT. I happen to be mostly involved with people who are left-wing and who are supportive of socialist principles. And to us, that means, sure, ownership of the production of the means of production, but also ownership of the means of production of money. Because money is the system whereby the way in which we measure the production of value. But it's not inconsistent per se with the Marxist view on how value is generated. It does outline, so one of the issues that I have is that Marxists obviously rightly speak about capitalism, value being generated through the capitalist profit-seeking and labor relationship. But I don't see any difference between the type of investment that a capitalist might do in the economy at being, how is that any different to the type of investments that the government might do in the economy? If anything, the government is just simply a bigger investment body that can decide through many means, either democratic or non-democratic, depending on the government, on what constitutes something of value. So MMTs who are left-wing will see an opportunity in this because they see that the capturing of government, and obviously we have, people like to believe we have a democratic government. We fall short of that, I think, but it doesn't mean that we cannot continue traveling into that direction. But we see the capturing of government as absolutely key in being able to generate a society, create a society that works for workers and works for everybody. And that does not prescribe whether, whether we should rely on private investment, on kind of capitalist interaction. For example, some MMTs prescribe making banks, nationalizing banks, for example. Another thing that MMT academics would suggest is don't issue bonds, as Chris rightly mentioned earlier on. And the reason for that is, firstly, because it's not needed, but secondly, because you're given an interest stream, you're given free money to people simply for the fact that they have money. And it doesn't strike me as unfair as a left wing that we should allow people to make money from simply the fact that they have money. And therefore is something that I would like to see gone. And I don't see how that is all that is in any way contrary to the aims that Marxists have. There was another mention of MMT not having anything new on Keynes. And if you read Keynes's book on how to pay for the war, which was a prescription for the finances of the government during the Second World War, he does mention in the things that MMTers say now, that a government can always find the means to pay for spending. So there is a lot that MMT learns from Keynes, but MMT also takes things from others, Minsky and from others, and it puts it all together in a way that hasn't been put together before. Now, MMT academics are trying to remain neutral because they want people to understand that MMT is probably as politically agnostic as it can possibly get. However, a right winger, as Chris also mentioned, or a left winger may use it in completely different ways. So I don't see why, I just wanted to say that, I don't see why, Marxists and MMTs cannot get along. And I do think that if Marx was alive here now and he found the insights from MMT, he would find a way of incorporating that into his analysis.
Thank you. I think Marxists and MMTs go well along splendidly. Okay, Hans-Peter next.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Hans-Peter. I'm a supporter of Trotsky's group called the Bolshevik Tendency, and that will obviously shape a bit what I'll be talking about. So first of all, I think it's important to recognize that Keynesianism failed in the 1970s for a reason, which is the end of profitability of capitalism. And the neoliberal recipes that were prescribed to the economies, Britain obviously being one of the most dramatic examples of this, had a structural necessity. They weren't just not just morally abhorrent people who did this, but they followed the requirements that that Britain's capitalist class had at the time. And fundamentally, one way to look at it is that in 2008, in reacting to the crisis, the government did actually hand out a lot of free money. They saved a lot of banks, as was noted earlier. We had an economy of zero interest rates, which effectively was handing out free money, not to the working class, but to the capitalist class. So again, not necessarily a class-specific thing that MMT does. But it's the same principle, I guess, which is you hand out money, you hope that that money will stimulate economic growth. And so assume we had a Labour government that handed out money to workers. Presumably that would be on an ongoing basis, because it's linked to the actual industrial capacity of Britain. doing so might have sort of a short-term impact in terms of brief economic growth. But quite possibly you would quite quickly hit that limited industrial capacity that Britain has, which means you then hit the level where you go into inflation, meaning that you have to tax. So how do you go to tax in the current economic structure? Do you go for the workers or do you go for the capitalists? If you go for the capitalists, you hit their profitability, which means the employment rates come down again. And I think that relates us back to the figures that Michael Roberts showed earlier, which is that whenever there were increased levels of government spending, it was desperate attempts to compensate for what the capitalists couldn't do or wouldn't do because of a lack of profitability. So the example of China is actually somewhat instructive because, but it's also misguided to use it for MMT, I believe, because China is fundamentally not a capitalist economy. The Chinese economy is still basically rests still on the foundations of the 1949 revolution, which expropriated the capitalist class mostly. Yes, since the reform, some capitalists have come back and play a role in the economy, but the Chinese Communist Party controls the entire financial system, or the most significant part, certainly the big four banks. It runs based on control of these banks. It finances state-owned enterprises, a lot of which aren't actually profitable, but have to carry out certain social measures like making sure that there's enough employment, and to a lesser extent, not so much nowadays, but from the Mao years, certain other social welfare measures. But that's fundamentally the difference. I'm just winding up now. Fundamentally, even though I'm not endorsing the Chinese way, I think the deformed revolution that China carried out is not exactly the model, but a social revolution would actually be required to bring about the control of the economy to an extent whereby we could actually make it work for the working class.
I prefer the Russian Revolution myself. Okay, I'm asking Jill is the next person to make a contribution. I'm trying to unmute you. There you go. Oh no, you're still muted. Oh. Can you see the button somewhere? Can you try and say something? Maybe.
Is that it?
Yes, we can hear you now. There you go.
I think this is a point in passing only, but it occurred to me that it was always a brilliant idea, and somehow or other that it might well find a place in a sensible, balanced economy when one finally gets there, and it's Keynes. One of the speakers was making the point of the balance between the rich and the poor and saying the rich must consume more. Fine. Keynes, of Bretton Woods, was dealing with gross national products, and the smaller countries, let's say the poorer countries, had very small gross national products levels, and the bigger countries obviously had vast gross national products. So each was, it was agreed that each country should have its agreed sum, and together with that agreed sum, it had the ability to borrow up to a certain level. Above that level, it would pay interest like one does. And so it was clear, but the larger countries had the obligation to consume. And did they not consume as much as they were required to consume to keep the actual system going, they also would pay interest on what they had not consumed. Now, I think that's an absolutely brilliant idea because obviously you can't kind of tie people in knots down to it, but it could be part of a system. People go, many of them have only one millionaire into a billionaire, into a trillionaire, into a quadruplionaire, etc., and that's their great delight in life. And it doesn't do anybody any good. And I think somehow something of the actual potential which could be fed into the system could be controlled by Keynes's idea of the interest for not consuming being equivalent to the interest for borrowing money. That's all.
Thank you, Jill. Julian Wells, please. There you go. Oh. Gone. Now you can.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah.
Technical question. Banks create money by when they make a loan, but of course that's balanced on their balance sheet by the asset that they then acquire. But if the government creates money, then what's the balance sheet consequence of that? And does that make a difference somehow? That's my question.
Thank you. Bradley, please. I'm unmuting you.
Okay, you can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yep. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to address something very quick because we've been speaking a lot about Keynes quite a bit, and MMT is much more than Keynes. I'd like to bring to people's attention the name of Abba Lerner, who wrote Functional Finance. One thing that people need to remember is what MMT is doing by describing the realities of the monetary system. We are also able to highlight through history how Keynes's version of it was incomplete in terms of his understanding. I mean, after World War II, we had the Bretton Woods system. We had a currency tied to a commodity like gold. These were constraints, and it's through the MMT lens that we can see a lot of these. Of course, we don't have these constraints anymore. I mean, to turn to the political side of it, just very quickly, how many times do Labour get unstuck by the how are you going to pay for it? It's the question. Always. When Labour wants to do something, it's bombarded by the media. How are you going to pay for it? Once you understand the MMT framework in terms of how money is created, that question largely goes away. But we always tie ourselves up in knots in terms of we need to generate tax revenues and so on and so on. It's a bit like a dog chasing its own tail. But with the Keynes idea of that's MMT, people need to understand there's a lot more to this. It's not just Lerner, it's George Friedrich Knapp, a German, Wayne Godley, who offered sectoral balances, which is a very important component to MMT. So it's much more deeper than just spouting off Keynes and thinking this is Keynes reincarnate. It's not, it's much more. That's it.
Thank you very much. And as a last speaker, Peter Kennedy wanted to come back in again. Peter, are you there? There you are.
Yeah. Hi there.
Hi.
I just, what one sort of reflection is that I was asking myself is, why do we think that using money, manipulating money in fancy ways can solve a problem which is caused by money in the first place? So that's just one, thing. I'll leave people who are kind of gifted in MMT and forging their careers out of that to pontificate about it. But just to go on to a point, which is a simple question, the title of the talk was about capitalist crisis and MMT. I think from what's been said, there's people believe that MMT can solve this, and others on the other side say it's incapable of doing so. So my question in the time of COVID, which is also the kind of framework for this discussion tonight, is to ask the two speakers, could they just say something to people about what they believe is going to happen after this crisis, post-COVID, whenever that might be. What are the political and economic consequences going forward in their eyes? Okay.
It's a very good question, a rather large one. Who wants to go first? Maybe Chris first, if you want to. Oh. Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, good. Yeah, just pick up on Peter's point there in terms of what's going to happen after the pandemic, after the lockdown, the social distancing rules are eased. What will the economic consequences? Well, frankly, I think if the Tories carry on in office, it's almost certain to lead to a further round of even more austere austerity than what we've seen in the previous 10 years. And that's why I think it's so important that we use the MMT lens to challenge that narrative. I think as socialists, we are under an obligation to try and change the narrative. And I think, you know, MMT does give us an opportunity to be able to do that. As I've said, it is merely an understanding of how the monetary system operates. And, you know, as Henry Ford mentioned that quote earlier on, if, you know, people understood how the monetary system and the banking system work, then there would be a revolution by tomorrow morning. I mean, look, a lot of people just simply don't, you know what or how the monetary system in the country does work. And I think by trying to kind of explain that and use MMT as a way of explaining that, to demonstrate that it is possible to pay for the sort of programs that can create a good society without you know, creating a cataclysm. And I think it was Bradley who made the point that you know, Labour spokespeople have always got caught on the hook of the question, how are you going to pay for it? I mean, as I was saying in my opening remarks, well, you simply say, with money, stupid. How else? We are a sovereign currency, a currency issuing government. We can never run out of money. And as long as we are spending it to deal with the spare capacity that is in the economy, to deal with and bring into productive employment people who are unemployed and underemployed, and so long as we're using it to improve our public services, to improve our infrastructure, to tackle the housing crisis, I mean, it's an absolute scandal. And I'm, you know, surprised that people aren't more angry about the fact that in the 5th biggest economy in the world, we have so much deprivation and inequality. And I think MMT does give us a lens to use to explain how the monetary system operates, and to say, having got that understanding of how the monetary system operates, we're going to deploy it in the interests of the many, not the few, because at the moment it's working in the interests, as we know, of the few, not the many. Hans made a point about the MMT, and I think he was making the point that, you know, you get to a point where you end up having to, you know, maybe tax either the workers or the capitalists. Well, I think obviously the tax burden should fall on the heavier shoulders, but just to repeat the point, is not to actually generate the income that you need. And I think both Mike and I agree on this. Not to generate the revenue that they need to pay for your program. It's for a range of other reasons why we use the tax regime. But for me, what I want to see is, I want to see a fundamental shift in the balance of wealth and power in our country. And that means, in my opinion, is perhaps dusting off the 1974 Labour Party manifesto, which did talk about an irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power. And the way I think you can go a long way to achieving that is a huge expansion in the worker cooperative sector in this country, so that the kind of, you know, the surplus value that is created by workers is actually then shared by all of the workers and doesn't go into the pockets of the capitalists, the corporations, who at the moment are enjoying the, you know, the fruits of the endeavours of the workers in this country. What was another point here that Julian made about the balance sheet consequences? Michael might be more qualified to kind of deal with that, but I frankly don't think it really is an issue, is a problem for us in that sense. So frankly, I don't see, you know, as actually, you know, causing us any, you know, significant difficulties. The fact that we, you know, we would invest in, you know, use our ability as a currency issuing government to use that for the benefit of the vast majority of people, to create the good society that I've talked about, I think is something that you know, the vast majority of people, if we could explain that to people, would get behind and could understand. And I'll just finish really with reiterating the point I think that Patricia made. Again, as socialists, if we could, as socialists, give the working class, if you like, the power over the production of money, then that puts us in a very powerful position. And I think MMT does actually give us that opportunity to do precisely that. And so I think, you know, Patricia articulated, you know, those people, those of us that kind of, if you like, advocate MMT, it's, you know, it is very much merely a lens, a way of understanding the system, and it shouldn't be seen as in itself, you know, providing the solutions or the answers to all the other, you know, problems and concerns that those of us on the left believe need to be addressed. We need to deal with that in a separate policy program. But, you know, the two things are complementary. They don't cut across each other. MMT doesn't prevent you, you know, creating worker cooperatives. It doesn't prevent you from redistributing income and wealth. It doesn't automatically mean that it's about, you know, preserving and saving, you know, the capitalist status quo. Far from it. It's merely a tool. It's merely a lens. And I think it's really important that we understand that. And if we do that, I honestly believe it really is a powerful tool in our locker that we can use for a progressive socialist program.
Thank you very much, Chris. Is it a powerful tool, Michael?
Well, I think, as Chris said, Patricia presented the argument for modern monetary theory, in which she said it's merely a description of how money works. Well, if it's just a description of how money works, it's not particularly helpful to the rest of us, except if you want to say more than that, which then Bradley does. It says, no, it's not just that, it's much deeper than that. It's not just Keynes about deficit spending, because MMT then is deficit spending in order to boost demand, get governments to spend money to boost employment. So it's more than just how money works. And it's not just Keynes. There's Abbie Lerner, who said that's a sort of functional finance role that it can play. Then there's Knapp, who's saying the state creates money and directs it and can tax it, and therefore provides the basis for the circulation of money. There's lots. Then there's Minsky, said Patricia, lots of people she mentioned behind driving the idea of modern monetary theory and deficit financing, but not Marx. Marx isn't mentioned. The idea of the exploitation of labor for production and for profit, no, not by Abbie Lerner, not by Minsky, not by Keynes. In fact, Keynes is very opposed to it. Not by any of the people mentioned here. So just describing how money works, and then there's a question of the circulation of money, is not just what people are saying. They're saying, MMT is saying more than that. They're saying this means governments can spend money, print money, and they can spend money, and they can take the economy into full employment and sustain it there. If you don't think that that's what they say, then the job guarantee and all the people who promote that as part of the MMT school, that's what they're saying, that they can then establish full employment and maintain it. And if it starts being inflationary, then we tax it a bit. So we macro manage this capitalist economy by trying to keep full employment through how much we spend, how much we run a deficit, how much we print money, and how much we tax. That's the only policy way of looking at how this is going to be, capitalism is going to be run. So the answer apparently is deficit financing. And that's what Chris argued. He said, look, there were two countries in the Great Recession that didn't have a slump. It was China, who had a big fiscal stimulus, and it was Australia. Actually, Australia didn't have a fiscal stimulus, but leave that aside. The point is, as other speakers have said, there's a big difference with China. China, where 60% of the assets are publicly owned, where the state banks are in control, where there's a direction of planning, where the Chinese can decide, whether the government can decide what they're going to, not just how much money they can print, but how they spend it and where they put it productively. That wouldn't apply in the capitalist economy like Britain. It doesn't matter how much money you print if the capitalists won't invest it. At the moment, the US government has just printed $9 trillion, much of which is not going to be financed by bonds, but by central bank financing. $1 trillion of that dollars has been handed over to businesses. Are they investing it? No, they're not. the monetary funds, money funds, where people hoard their cash, has leaped up by $1 trillion in just a month. You can give water for a horse, but if it won't drink it, then you don't get a result. And that's the problem with just deficit financing, whether it's through understanding the money system and the tricks of circulation, which, as Marx called it, is not a solution to bringing us to sustained growth, full employment in a harmonious and ecological way as well. Nothing in there. Now, Chris says this is separate from money. All I want to show you is that it's a tool for saying that we don't have to have austerity. Well, we don't have to have austerity anyway. We don't need the modern monetary theory to convince us of that. And in fact, it's not just what's being said. It's more than that. It's being saying that MMT, Keynesian deficit financing, by Abbey Lerner, by Knapp, by Gazelle, all these monetarists can actually bring about full employment on a harmonious basis under a capitalist system. I don't agree. I don't think it's possible to bring about an end to slumps, booms and slumps and recessions. Macro management by the Keynesians failed in the 70s precisely because of that reason. They can't do it unless we have control and ownership of the means of production in the strategic sectors of the economy. It's not a separate issue. It's an alternative. That MMT is basically saying we can make capitalism work better. I emphasize that point again. Marxist theory is saying, no, we need to replace capitalism, not make it work better. And to argue that this is a fantastic thing, new innovation, which will help us to understand what's going on in money. And then if we understand the production and control of money, then we've solved our problems. Producing money doesn't produce value. Producing money doesn't produce employment if capitalists are in control of employment and investment for profit. Unless you change that, then just producing more money is an illusion. It's not going to succeed.
Thank you very much, Michael. We just had under 100 people in this session, which is great. I personally think a debate is always a more interesting way to learn rather than a lecture. So I think it's a good way to thrash out differences, and we certainly had a fascinating debate in this session. And we're going to put this video online tomorrow, hopefully, with some background reading. So if both speakers have any particular background reading that they could forward to me, I will put that online. We have another debate coming up on Thursday about momentum. Can it be reformed? Because it has internal elections. But next week, and I would like to invite comrades particularly to this, Peter Kennedy will be giving a lecture on an introduction to finance capital, which will touch on quite a few things that we discussed today. The week after, then we'll be hearing about a session on Marxism and the ecological crisis, which I would have thought will interest most speakers in this session as well. So thank you very much for participating, both of you. I very much enjoyed it, and I hope to see you soon. Have a good evening.